Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is Larry Mihlon. Larry is the former chief of police of West Long Branch. His son died of a drug overdose, and fortunately, he was able to be revived. But that was a life-altering experience for Larry, and he's here to talk about his story and his mission. Welcome.
Thank you, Natasha.
So, one of the first things that comes to mind as a former chief of police, you have a certain image to maintain. And I would suspect that, as most of us on some level, unless it's really impacted us, there's still some remnant of that story of drug addiction is really those people, whoever those people are.
Very much.
And there is this kind of maybe even undiscerned cynicism about it where, let them handle it, or just a loser. So I think it must have been doubly confronting for you, I'm guessing,
Yes.
that, you're this very public figure. You represent the law, the straight and narrow, the clean and squeaky, and your son overdoses. So tell me about what led up to that and what awarenesses you had along the way.
Well, that person that you're speaking about, the person, not my kid, doesn't happen
Right.
in my life. I was that person on all the way up till April 12th of 2013. They were junkies,
Yeah.
dirtbags. They weren't people who I associated with. They certainly weren't people in my family. And there's a concept that always comes to mind when I think about this, especially when I read a lot about what goes on today, where there are, for instance, there are some law enforcement agencies in this country right now who are now refusing to administer Narcan to people who overdose after the third overdose. And what I say all the time about that is that, to me, is reflective of someone who does not have skin in the game.
Right.
In other words, the perspective was mine as of April 12th, 2013. April 13th, 2013 at 8 a.m., my wife, who was on your show previously, told me that she thought that my son was asleep in front of the TV, having played video games all night, and he was snoring. So I went downstairs to investigate, and having at that point been a police officer for 30 years, his posturing, his color, everything else, I knew, even before I touched him, I knew he was dead. So naturally, the cop part of me kicks in, and I run over to him. And again, if you have any experience dealing with people who are no longer alive, as soon as you touch them, you can really tell. You have a sensation that very unique about that. And I did all kinds of other things in EMS circles. There's a thing that you referred to as doing a primary survey, and you open his eyes and everything. And I'll never forget this, when I realized his pupils were not responsive, that really drove it home for me. So my wife called 911. Of course, when she's on the phone with the 911 operator, I find out all this out after the fact, but when she's on the phone with the 911 operator, she also told them who I was. Mm. And we got a substantial response, and thank God for it, from the Long Branch Police Department, which is where I lived at the time. I still live in Long Branch. So we had the ambulance come. I had a considerable response, as I said, from the Long Branch Police Department, and they took over the resuscitative efforts on my son. And fortunately, at that point, the paramedics were carrying the different method of administering Narcan. They administered Narcan, and in the ambulance, he sat bolt upright and he said, "I got to quit," which to me, it's still hard for me to even say this, but that was the most beautiful sentence that I've ever heard in my entire life, because that meant his brain, because I didn't know how long he'd been out, his brain could form a sentence.
How is Narcan administered?
Well, Narcan is administered a number of ways. Right now, the popular and pervasive method of administering Narcan is a nasal
Okay.
application.
So it's something that happens quickly and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So he sits upright and he says, I have to quit. You have this tremendous sense of, oh my God, thank God, thank God, thank God. Then what happens?
well, that was the tip of the iceberg because they the paramedics and the ambulance took him to the hospital, and one of the things, having been a cop for so long, one of the things I knew that I needed was, if I could get it, was the packaging of whatever he took. So I started to do a little bit of background there, trying to contact the jurisdiction where I believed that he'd been the night before, to try to get them to basically secure this stuff,
Yes.
raid the place really,
Yeah.
to try to get it. So he goes to the hospital. They didn't realize at the time, and they were trying to determine the extent of the damage that he did to his heart and his lungs. And in order to do that, one of the things they did was they put him in a coma in the hospital. So he was on a ventilator for a week. And I will tell you that if you've ever seen anybody, especially somebody who means anything to you, if you've ever seen them on a ventilator, that's something you'll never forget. I say this, I use this all the time, so I forget where I heard it, but sometimes I wish my mind was an Etch-a-Sketch, that I could just go like this and make the images go away. I can't on some of these. They'll be with me for the rest of my life. So he's in the coma. They tell us that they're going to bring him out of the coma and to see if he can breathe on his own and determine the extent of the damage. And fortunately, he came out of the coma and he ended up going to rehab. Little story just to let you know about the difference then to now, about the stigma associated with people who do heroin.
Yes.
I remember the cardiologist at the hospital, the cardiologist and the pulmonary doctor pulled me aside to let me know, to give me an update. And I'm still angry when I think about this guy. The cardiologist looked me in the eye and just said, well, just so you know, your son's probably going to die. No cushioning it, couching it in terminology or anything. That's what he said. And it turns out that the reason he said that was, and again, the prevailing, especially then, the prevailing attitude was, if you do drugs, you get what you deserve.
Yeah, that's a biggie.
Which, and getting back to my skin in the game comment, people who say that didn't see or go through what I've been through, and certainly not what some of the other folks who actually permanently and for good lost their friends and loved ones. What kind of human being would say, well, you get what you deserve, if it's their son or their daughter? So, and again, I mean, thanks to a lot of the awareness that's happened since 2013 to today,
That has changed?
It's changed a lot. It's something that we collectively, everybody, even the people with skin in the game and even those who don't have skin in the game, we have to keep the momentum going on this issue because, as we all know, people tend to have a short memory. You know, what was horrible last week is not horrible to this week. What were we talking about? You know, that kind of thing.
Yes, and I think also it's hard to shift that. People are being more aware, but as you said, until it impacts you, there's still that aspect of it of this doesn't really affect me. This is not, again, it's something that other people have.
Right.
And I'm not sure what it takes other than building more awareness. And also the numbers are starting to be staggering. But that's a tough one. And then, your son is probably going to die. I mean,
well, to have a doctor look you in the eye and tell you that with zero caring in his delivery or his eyes, because it was more like, well, what do you expect? Your son did drugs.
I hope you go back and confront him.
Well, now that I'm retired, you probably don't want that to happen. But but he.
So here he is in the hospital, and they've put him in an induced coma.
Right.
And then when he comes out, and what then?
Well, one of the things, ironically, and very tragically, while my son was in the ICU at the hospital, one of my fellow chiefs of police called me, and I saw his telephone number on the caller ID on my cell phone, and I basically just answered it to let him know, look, I'm busy right now. I really can't talk to you about this right now, or about whatever it is. And one of the things he was calling to tell me was that a recently retired police chief, his son actually died basically the same time my son died and was resuscitated.
Yes.
So I made time during the time that my son was in the hospital to go to the funeral and to connect with him, to extend to him the kind of condolence and sympathy that something like that deserves. And right from the funeral home, I went right back to the hospital, walked into my son's hospital room and said, "You're going to rehab." And he said, "Yeah, I know." And the good thing is, a lot of these folks, my son included, very often they know they want the help, they know they need the help, but they need a push. And it could be a big push, it could be a little push, but they need some support and some affirmation that that's the correct thing to do and a good thing for them to do.
And even some coercion.
Well, yes, sometimes, yeah. So he went to rehab. That was one of 3 times that he went to rehab, and I'm happy to report at this point that he's doing pretty well. So,
you and I were talking about this before. This whole concept of addiction, because we're all addicted to something, and but most of it doesn't kill us. But I think we can expand our level of compassion by looking at our own lives where we're addicted. Some of us have health issues and we don't pay attention to the rules, and it's a form of addiction. And, we talked about Gabor Mate, the doctor in Vancouver who works with addicts, and he kind of compares it to this reference in Buddhism of the hungry ghosts. And the hungry ghosts with the big bellies and the tiny little mouths and the tiny little necks, so that no matter how much they put in, it's never enough. The belly is never full. And I think for me, as I was thinking about it, is we all have that at some point, the belly not being full, like some emptiness, lack of fullness. And I think part of it is just learning to be okay with the emptiness, or with the of feeling that, and not making it wrong and not making it feel like we have to do something about it. I don't think we're taught that. I think what we're taught is, you have an itch, scratch it immediately, reach for whatever it's going to take.
I'm glad you said that, because I think that one of the, I'm personally not an addict, but through my wife's organization, the Family Addiction Network, I've had the opportunity to meet and work with a few people who are recovering addicts. And one of the things that happens is that people who get involved in the abuse or improper use of opioids and opiates, it's self-medication. And they're, like you said, they're trying to fill a hole. They're trying to deal with something. They have a poor self-image. And what I call an inexorable nexus between psychological issues, and people always get all upset about that. And everybody got psychological issues. It's just how you deal with it. So, and these folks need some help in determining and guidance in seeing that the way that they are doing it through drugs is bad. So
Life-threatening.
Yeah.
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 And so let's talk about what you're doing now,
Well,
because you made a deal with God.
I left that out of my story. That morning when I found him there, I very literally looked up and I made a deal with God. I said, if you give him back, I'll make it worth your while. And I got him back, so I've been holding up my end of the bargain ever since. And how I do that is, when I became chief of police, and even before that when I was a captain, sometimes you had the opportunity to, when you come to work, you wear a suit or you wear civilian clothes instead of a uniform. What I did quite a bit once this happened was I would, if I appeared in public to speak about this issue, I made sure to wear my uniform and with all of my medals and paraphernalia on my uniform, because I wanted to do everything I could to address the stigma of addiction. When we were younger, the perception was that it was inner city people, homeless people. It was
the folk of the fringe.
Right. Not the case anymore. I don't even know when it happened or if it was ever even the case, to tell you the truth. I mean, there were people all over the place. I mean, we see it all the time, celebrities dying of doing this. But so I was asked to use my public speaking venues to talk about the stigma of addiction. And I was asked when Ocean County rolled out the deployment of Narcan for law enforcement in Ocean County at the time, I was asked to tell my story very briefly at the rollout seminar. And in attendance at the seminar was Governor Christie and Joe Coronado, the spectacular prosecutor in Ocean County, and Chris Gramiccioni, the prosecutor in Monmouth County. They were all there. But Governor Christie, when he heard my story, he was particularly taken by the story. And he, in fact, during his speech right afterwards, he had never met me before that, but in his speech right after that, he applauded my speaking about it in public, and he said, more people should do that. And I agree. So since then, I have done it quite a bit. And anybody that asks me to talk about it, I'll do that. I'll speak about it so that people see that it isn't those
backstreet
right. It's
alleys.
not those backstreet people. It's everybody. It's doctors and lawyers and cops.
And your next door neighbor, and probably, or maybe in your home.
Yeah, God forbid.
So looking back, and this is not to look back, shoulda, woulda, coulda, and how come, but it's kind of, what wisdom could I have used at the time, or what, is there any place along the way that you think there were cues you missed?
Oh,
and
yeah.
also, what would you have wanted from the environment that you didn't have access to or didn't think you had access to?
Well, that's an excellent question, because it actually gives me the opportunity to talk about a couple of things. One of the things that I say quite often is, as deadly as the drugs were to my son, so was my denial that he was using them. I knew better. Trained police officer. 10 years of my 34 years as a police officer I spent as a detective. I knew the signs, but that couldn't be. It's my son. Can't be.
Wow.
And even
Powerful.
when I knew that he was using drugs, heroin specifically, when he would exhibit the signs of going through withdrawal, he's got the flu. He's not going through withdrawal. He's got a fever. He doesn't feel good. He needs to take a bath at 3 o'clock in the morning because he doesn't feel good. That's just can't be withdrawal. Over and over and over and over again. So what I tell people about that is, take the example from me and other folks and don't let that be the case. You don't always have to assume the worst, but look for it. Do something about it.
What would you have actually done? Or what would you suggest that people do? Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm in denial, I see these signs, then what?
Well, one of the questions that I got a lot when this was happening was, well, you're a cop. Why don't you get a drug dog. Get one of the drug dogs, bring them into your house. That sounds like a really good idea, but that's actually misappropriation of government assets, you know, unless it's an actual
drug bust.
Yeah, unless it's an active investigation. I can't just call up one of the, hey, by the way, bring the dog over. Because I didn't know at the time, and I do now, that there is a private service out there that is, they're not cops, but it's a fully trained drug dog. I have since met and befriended the guy who runs this, and I tell people all the time, do it. If you really think that your loved one or even your friend is using illegal drugs and you want to know where it is, well, first of all, if it's your kid, that's not his room, that's your room. Search it. Take it apart. Find the drugs. Look, if you were going to hide it, where would it be? Under a drawer, behind something, in something, anywhere. Find it and get it out of there and get your friend or your relative or your son or your daughter help.
And what if they refuse or deny?
Well, that's a tricky subject because the old adage of, you know, you can lead a horse to water and you can't make him drink, that's true.
But there are steps you could have taken that.
Well, yes, and we did to a degree. But again, I mean, unfortunately for me, it really drove it home when there was no heartbeat, you know, and you don't want it to come that far before you do something about it. So, but yeah, so that's what I would say is that, you know, take action, do something. And the other thing is, there's a big argument that goes on in this whole community about tough love. I won't get into too much of it, but, you know, there are those people who say, well, just kick them out. Kick them out on the street. That'll show them. You might not like the result. Over and over, I've heard addicts say that recovered addicts, you know, folks in recovery, that they are so grateful that their mother, their father, their aunt, their grandmother, whoever, never gave up on them.
Wow, that's very powerful.
Absolutely. And so the real message is, therefore, don't give up on them. It's hard.
Yeah.
Don't give up on them, though. Be there for them. You're gonna. It's one of the reasons that my wife started with her friends, started Family Addiction Network, was you feel alone. You don't want to do these things.
Isolate them even further, and
yep. But the families and the friends of those mired in addiction go through excruciating pain. But thanks to organizations like Family Addiction Network that offer a gathering place where you can go with people who are going through the same thing or worse than you're going through, and at least you can be heard, or you can just sit there and listen and be assured and comforted to know that you're not the only one going through it.
Yeah, I think that's a pivotal point. And, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of us have been kind of programmed to think, just because of the way it's been up until now, is that there's kind of just one way to do this. It's either got to be a 12-step program and I think it's really vital to know, I think it's vital to know that there are 12-step programs, there are rehabs, there are support groups, there are places to go just to be listened to, there are places to go where you hear other people's stories, but that there are more and more resources. And I think, because for somebody, you know, a family or an addict, to say you have to get into a 12-step program, you know, that may not be the most acceptable or the best thing for them or the most viable for them. So I think this one size fits all is one thing that we have to pay attention to. And, you know, you talk about the psychological issues, and you know, we are human beings, and all of our emotions and our physicality are all tied in together. So it's not like, oh, you know, you must have been abused if you, you know, are a drug addict. That has happened in some cases. But, you know, it's like somebody wrote, it may not be what happened to the child. It may have been what didn't happen.
Right.
You know, it may have been the stressors around them. It may have, you know, so it's not like, I think we have to stop looking and playing the blame game.
Yeah.
I think it's really, okay, this is what we're dealing with. And then there are a gajillion things we can reach for, or at least we hope there are that many, but not to pigeonhole it into it has to be this way.
Yeah. Well, like you said, one size fits all, wrong. You wouldn't send somebody like me, I mean, aside from my suit, I wouldn't send somebody, you just go buy me a suit. What do you say?
Right.
What do you? Just get a large, and just I'll make do.
Right.
It might work, it might not. You need to see if it fits you, if it's going to work for you. Not everybody eats the same thing. Not everybody dresses alike. And then the other thing you said that to me really resonates is the connection between addiction and, for lack of a better term, psychological issues. Stop with the stigma.
Yeah.
Of I don't want to get help. If I get help, people think I'm crazy. They think there's something wrong with me. As I said, I absolutely believe there is nobody that doesn't have an issue somehow.
Absolutely.
Have the courage, and not only have the courage to do something about it, but have the courage to support your friend or loved one when they say they need help.
Yeah.
Despite how funny it seems on social media to make fun of somebody who goes for help, get over it. Support these people. Do good. Don't do not only do no harm, but do some good.
Yeah.
Support somebody in their pursuit of trying to get through an issue.
We're at the end of our time, but I think one of the things that, as a coach, I work with my clients and my students when I teach is, when you talk about social media, start questioning where your thought came from. Am I doing this because it resonates for me,
Yep.
in my character, in who I am, or am I doing it because I've inherited all these conversations and I've been brainwashed to see, look at life a particular way in order to fit? It really comes back to kind of who do I want to be in the heart of it,
Don't think what you think because somebody said you should think that.
Yeah, exactly. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank
We're at the
you.
end of our time.
It's great. Thank you.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.